So this evening it's interesting because I often don't get up and speak in front of crowds this way, so I'm going to have to ask that you give me some leeway in that respect. Although a lawyer and sometimes an orator, there's a mixture of truth and fiction in whatever I say, and hopefully it's more truth than fiction. So I've been asked to talk, kind of split this talk into two pieces. One is to talk to people, I guess, about my journey to this particular point, and then to kind of talk about something which is maybe not about my journey, but maybe a little bit more about your journey. And so I'll do that. I'll talk about those two things, and perhaps at the Q&A we can meld those two thoughts as to why I've put them together that way. So just by way of background, so Dennis has done a great introduction of me in the sense that, yes, I am a corporate partner at Linklaters. That's one facet of my life. It tends to be a pretty intensive one. I've actually been based in the UK for about 18 years. So I'm a guy who's grown up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And how you get from Milwaukee, Wisconsin to London standing at the library addressing you is probably a boring tale, but nonetheless it is mine. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but I had an interesting upbringing in the sense that my family, my father was one of three brothers, born in Little Rock, Arkansas in the 1920s. Three brothers, actually. My Uncle Bruce, my dad, Tom, and my Uncle Jackie. And to tell you my life story, I have to start with telling you what my grandmother told them. Which my grandmother told them is, "I'd rather see you dead than bums." And that set the tone for the entirety of our family. So I belong to a family which I think is fairly unique in the United States. So we're a Black American family, three brothers strong on my father's side, probably about 12 cousins. Each of us has a postdoctorate degree, or a postgraduate degree, including doctorates. That's pretty incredible from a family that comes from 1925 in Little Rock, Arkansas to 2000. But that goes to the expectations that were always set into my family. And therefore I had a pretty unique upbringing in the sense that my father was one of the first Black executives in the United States and was called the most powerful Black executive in the United States throughout the 70s and 80s. My Uncle Bruce was the president of the Board of Dentistry in Georgia. As you can imagine, a probably pretty challenging place for a Black man to be the head of dentistry. My Uncle Jackie was the first Black to graduate from the University of Arkansas, Little Rock, or Fayetteville Law School, where during the time of separate but equal, he started to take class at night because they didn't want him to take class with white students during the day, separate but equal, until students started coming to his classes because he was getting one-on-one tutoring. In which case you'd say, well, actually maybe they came to their senses, but what they did instead was put him into a day classroom and roped him off from the rest of the class. And that was one generation ago. And so if we talk about my journey, I have to talk about the people who were there before I was and the people who surrounded and influenced me. Now, my biggest influence from a professional's perspective was my father, but actually my mother, which maybe not surprise you, in the sense I was given three options growing up. I could be a doctor, a lawyer, or get my PhD, and that was just so I had choices in life. I ended up growing up in Milwaukee, but I went to school at the University of Southern California because if you've ever been to Wisconsin, you know you need to get out of Wisconsin. And I spent time in Los Angeles, and I then decided after studying there that I'd go to New York University because I thought Los Angeles was one thing, but I wanted to experience NYU and New York. And to me, that was the first time that I really started to think about my professional career. There I got my JD and my MBA, so I'm as much a business person as I am a lawyer. And oftentimes people don't think of lawyers as business people, but believe me, the good ones are. And my life is defined after that point by doing two things. One is picking up the phone, and two, being open to change. The normal course of events for a student coming out of law school, particularly at that time, would have been to stay in the US, to have joined a New York law firm. I was actually going to be going back to Los Angeles, and I was going to be a corporate lawyer in Los Angeles. I had a window on the 30th floor of the San Juan Bank building looking out at the Hollywood sign. And I thought, that's fantastic. That's really what I'd like to do. But I thought I'd take a chance, actually. I had a summer experience with Linklaters. I got asked to come to London to join them, and at that point join their fledgling US practice focused on capital markets. And I thought, what the heck, why not? And that why not decision actually has shaped the entirety of my life and the entirety of my family's life ever since. So I came to London in 1997, and I've never really left. And for me, that has been such a defining decision, which at some level I'd like to say, you know, that was just so well thought out. I really knew what I was doing when I was standing there saying, New York law firm, Los Angeles, international law firm, London. What a convenience of choices. What a fantastic opportunity. And I know what my whole life is going to be if I choose them. I had no idea. The idea of my thought was I was getting married. My wife and I were young. We didn't have any commitments. And we thought, why not? Let's go spend some time in London. And actually, that's the best decision we ever made. It was the least informed decision I've ever made, and yet the best informed, best result decision I've ever made. And what ended up happening is we opened ourselves up to a whole new world that we hadn't experienced before. And then my career kind of developed in the way that many careers develop, particularly at that point in time, which is working hard and getting lucky. Now, Linklaters is a very interesting place in the sense that many of you who may know of Linklaters, it's a very well thought of law firm. But to be a person of color in Linklaters is a pretty rarity. And to continue from the beginning of a career right through the partnership is even a greater rarity. So there are 2 black partners within Linklaters. 50% of them are standing in front of you this evening. We have 420 partners globally. So it's a pretty interesting environment. At one point, I think it's the most diverse place I've ever been in my entire life, in the sense that I walk around the hallways and I see people of different creeds, different colors, different religions, different backgrounds, different football teams, supporters. But at some level, we have so much, such a way to go. And it's interesting. The reason I tell you that is because oftentimes people will come to me and say, Tom, I'd really like you to be my mentor. I'd really like you to engage and give me whatever wisdom of your thought, whatever that might be, which is always fine with me. I don't necessarily have a problem with that, but I didn't have that ability of someone to look for someone who had a similar experience or background to me. Being American was probably more of a disadvantage than being a person of color. In the sense of being American, there was no cultural affinity, you're always kind of a bit of an outsider, and people didn't understand what you did. But what I did is I focused on forming relationships with people. And that's the most important thing. I found my mentorship in my peers and my colleagues and people who would take the time. And I didn't have one, I had many. And to me, that was the key point in me developing my career, is actually building a network of people who would be ultimate supporters of me. And so ultimately, I progressed in a pretty traditional way through the law firm. I can't say that there was anything magical about it, other than I was always the person who was willing to do something slightly a bit different. That became important because about 2 years ago, I had been elected a corporate partner, and as Dennis said, I've been fortunate enough to work on some great deals for clients. I think I had to count it up earlier this week. I've probably done mergers and acquisitions in excess of 400 billion pounds, over the last 10 years. That's a pretty good number, and that's a pretty good representation of transactions. But that isn't how one defines a life or a career. That's just what one does for their clients. But I had 2 things that were really quite opportunistic. One was I was elected onto the board of directors of Linklaters. Probably the first person of color to sit on that board. And I was done at a pretty young age as a partnership. And that was partly because I was someone who kind of was willing to express their views. But that then allowed me to have this position to looking at our global corporate responsibility. That allowed me to reshape the firm's strategy in that regard and led me to the place where about 18 months ago I picked up the phone from the United Nations. The United Nations was looking for somebody to help them engaging in a discussion around corporate sustainability. Something you might think completely different from doing mergers and acquisitions. And it was, but what it allowed me to do is pick up something completely different, something completely relevant to what's going on, and actually make a big difference, not only to the firm, but to our clients and also to the UN. And so again, that sort of thing, allowing yourself and being open to change, has been something that's defined my career. In a bit, I can't talk to you about necessarily what made me successful or not. And the interesting thing is, because Dennis was talking to me about, well, what is it that you're going to speak about tonight? You know, we've had people talk about their journey, but we don't want too much on your journey because people kind of get lost in the journey. We don't want too much, kind of talking about something that might be boring. Talk about something that might be interesting to people. Well, that's always a very difficult thing to do when you don't know the people you're speaking about. But what I thought about actually is, you're having, the whole idea of this is to have people come up and talk about their experiences so that you can perhaps hear about what's made them successful or has allowed them to achieve some level of standing in their professional career. And I think that's a very valuable thing. But I think the premise actually of listening to me or anyone else, I think is interesting, but only to a point. I think the real question is what's going to be success in the future. And I'm not sure you can look at me or anyone else who's standing up here in their mid-40s or beyond and say that's going to be what's going to make me successful going forward. That's the premise of the second half of this conversation. And it really struck me when I was reading an article last week, which maybe many of you have already seen, as just the way I tend to be behind these things, where there was a study done by the US government, so therefore it's trustworthy, which indicated that about 65 to 70% of people who are coming into the workforce will have jobs that aren't created yet. So how do I tell you how to prepare for a job that doesn't exist yet? I don't want to stand up here and be so conceited as to think, well, if you do these 5 things and do those 4 other things, you'll be so well set. What I can say is that I just got some observations. And let me just share those observations with you if you don't mind. My first observation is really that your experience in the job market and building your career is going to be so different in the sense that you have to build a career based on 4 or 5 different, 6 or 7 different experiences. I've been with a law firm for nearly 20 years. My father was with his organization for 40 years. That world doesn't exist anymore. You all know that. I'm the one who has to learn that. And so therefore, actually, one of the things that I think you need to be cognizant of is that when you go out and go forward, you have to be prepared to educate people about what it means to employ you within the organization. Because I'm part of so many conversations right now, and given law is a pretty traditional place, where we have to convince ourselves, we're in the process of convincing ourselves that maybe our model isn't the right one for us in the future. But what we need to have and what we benefit from is people talking to us about that. You have to be prepared to educate people about what your career looks like. I can't tell you that coming in at Linklaters, for example, or a law firm or any organization at the first part of your career and then making CEO 20 years later is the pathway. Chances are it's not going to be the pathway. You're going to have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 different decisions to make before you get there. But the point is, you need to build a portfolio career. Which organization, which opportunity is going to be available to you to try to fill those gaps in what you think you need is going to be necessary for you to be successful. Perhaps you need to look for people who are successful and identify, yes, that's the type of organization. Yes, I see some positives in what they're doing, but I also see some drawbacks. You know, Tom has been a lawyer, but actually maybe that's not enough anymore. Just even in the law, you need to be doing other things. So you need to enter your job and go throughout your job in terms of building a portfolio of experiences that at the end of the day allow you to present yourself as someone who is ready for that job that doesn't exist yet, that opportunity that doesn't exist yet. The other side of that, however, is I really think that in addition to creating that kind of portfolio, you can't do it superficially. It doesn't mean moving from A to B to C to D to E. It actually means taking the time and investing in a place to build a particular skill set over a particular time and then thinking about how to move on. So in other words, don't move too quickly, because I think a lot of what people talk about today is actually moving from A to B and kind of the next best thing that comes around the corner. Sometimes for me, the best decisions, although I've said yes a lot, and those have been great, I've said no a lot too. And sometimes that's a good decision as well. So don't move too quickly. Make sure that when you take a position, you're clear about what it is you want to achieve. Achieve that, assess what other opportunities are there, but then think about moving on to kind of fill out that portfolio. I think the other thing that I can, just in terms of observations that I have, is really in terms of developing yourself. One of the things that I think has made me successful is really being observational with people, observing what they're doing and how they're acting and how they're interacting, both on the positive and the negative. So in other words, as much as I am concerned about how I come across, how I deal with clients, how the firm deals with clients, how I deal with the people I work with, actually I learn as much watching other people as I do in any other activity. So in other words, you have to appreciate the people who are around you and take ideas and strengths from them. Because again, that's about filling out your portfolio and your capability over a career. Ultimately, what I think you're building towards, or one would like to build towards, is actually having a number of different skill sets which are complementary and allow you to be flexible. Because if I think about 65% of the workforce not having jobs that aren't existing yet, you have to be flexible. You have to be able to pull upon different skill sets, but they have to be deep enough for you to be able to use them effectively. The last thing that I think I'd like to leave you with is one which, this is something I feel, but I'm not necessarily sure that you feel. And it probably comes from someone who's a client service guy, which is me. Relationships are really important. And relationships aren't really the 15-minute networking session. That's a great way to get to meet people. But actually, you have to develop those relationships over time, and you have to invest in them. And it's not kind of the fly-by-night kind of, we're going to tweet this and meet here and have this and do that and the other. That's all great stuff, but I'm not sure that's going to be helpful in terms of your career. I think what you need to do is think about the people you're interacting with and take the time to invest in people, in relationships with people. Offer something to get something. Make sure that you are engaging with them in terms of trying to develop your own career, in terms of trying to encourage them. That's the other side of it too, right? Each of you is coming to the table with something to offer. So the point is, try to help other people along the way, because I'll tell you what, those are the types of things which will pay off over time, particularly as you develop throughout your career. And you never should introduce yourself to someone or meet someone without the understanding and expectation that actually you have as much to give as you do have to get. And I think that's really key in terms of developing relationships. Doesn't mean every relationship is going to be one that's going to be fruitful or helpful from a professional perspective. But I tell you what, if you take that approach, you will definitely develop a network over the period of time that will actually help you both personally and professionally. And so the very final thought I have for you all, observation, and this is one that I think quite personal. We oftentimes think about careers in very hard terms. My career and my life, my profession and my person. I don't think that's a constructive way to think about it. I think that one has to engage in whatever one does, and particularly from a professional perspective, from a professional development perspective, but also a personal development perspective. They need to be rewarding on both counts. Because I tell you what, if they're not, you're not going to be doing it very long, you're not going to give it your all, and you're not going to get as much out of it. And so I think while you can definitely focus on the professional, and you should, you must keep yourself open for all of those other things that are going to allow you to develop as a person. And one of the things I felt very clear, very passionate about at Linklaters, for example, is making sure that people are working outside the organization, that they're making relationships, that they're doing things like this, that they're bringing all that experience back into the firm because it makes them a better professional, it makes them happier about being in the place and contributing more. And so I think that for me, in terms of employer, in terms of thinking about how to build and shape a career, you really should be focused on, I would recommend that you focus on doing things that offer you an opportunity to develop professionally, but also allow you to develop personally. Certainly there's an alignment that needs to be achieved in terms of developing your career, where you feel that you're contributing something valuable and that the company, the organization actually helps you develop. Because at the end of the day, my test is, on my deathbed, am I going to be complaining that I didn't actually do that extra deal? No, I'm not. And so therefore, I'm going to be looking for things that actually allow my life to be more full. I really enjoy my job. I know that's surprising as a lawyer, but that's because I work with great people. I have great clients. I have great colleagues that I work with. I do enjoyable stuff. But my life doesn't start and stop as being a lawyer. There's a lot more to me and a lot more to each and every one of you than the thing you do at work. But the thing is how to combine those two things so that at the end of that experience, you're actually in a better place. So those are my observations I had for you all. I don't know how much they're going to be valuable or worth, but whatever they are, I hope you take them on board for what they are and actually you create some of those jobs that aren't in existence yet. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and watch the rest of our talks below.